These bombs were part of an incident which had all the features of a major air raid: searchlights, anti-aircraft fire, bomb explosions and fires, with a rise in terror as the tempo increased.
By the Whit Bank holiday at the end of May 1941, what would become World War II had been raging for 21 devastating months. ERA, the name then for the Republic of Ireland, had declared neutrality. Britain alone stood against the Nazi onslaught. There had been mass attacks on British cities since September 1940, and there had been 57 consecutive raids on London. The industrial city of Belfast was also a target, and on Easter Tuesday, April 1941, at 10:40 p.m, squadrons of German aircraft appeared over the sky without warning and started to bomb Belfast indiscriminately. Many of the bombs were incendiary, igniting fires all over the city. The efforts of the firemen were not sufficient, and in an unprecedented move, Stormont asked Dublin for assistance. At 5:10, Eamon de Valera, the then Taoiseach, was awakened, and a quick decision was made to assist Belfast. And by 7:30 in the morning, 6 engines from the Republic with close to 100 men were on their way to assist their northern colleagues extinguish the Belfast blazes.
We made up a crew of 5 of us and set off to Belfast. And when we were going out the Buckingham Street gate, our station officer says to us, "Well, you're out, and God knows when you'll be back."
The firemen clung to their open vehicles, thundering at 60 miles per hour through the chilly morning on a journey of the brave into the unknown.
They were hailed as heroes by the people of Belfast, and although their mission of mercy would last about 20 hours, friendship between the firemen from the different jurisdictions would last decades. In the aftermath of the Belfast Blitz, more than 3,000 refugees would arrive and be welcomed in Dublin at Ames Street railway station. De Valera had made a quick decision on humanitarian grounds, which outweighed the political considerations that he would be infringing Ireland's neutrality. How would the Nazis react to this infringement? There had been many incidents of German bombs dropping on Northern Ireland, but this had been explained by technical or navigational hitches. The most serious of these incidents occurred on August the 26th, 1940, when 4 bombs were dropped on the tiny village of Campbell in County Wexford, killing 3 young women, sisters Mary Ellen and Kitty Kent, and their friend Kathleen Hurley, whilst they had enjoyed a chat in the canteen of the Shelburne Creamery Co-op. The Germans explained the bombing as a navigational error on behalf of the pilot. The other explanation is that the bombing of the creamery was revenge for Ireland supplying goods to Britain. The proof the Germans had was that boxes of butter with the creamery labels had been discovered in Dunkirk after the evacuation in May 1940.
It was a little community. They were as close-knit families as you could ever find.
People on the North Strand, they were really like one large family.
The little village of the North Strand had been a Dublin treasure despite its hardships and pockets of poverty. Even though some of its dwellings were tenements and insanitary, it was still one of the most traditional and picturesque areas in the city. It was an uncommonly provincial, old-fashioned community where residents traced their roots back generations. The simple way of life endeared it both to the residents and visitors. People from other parts of Dublin liked to ramble over and enjoy its charms. The area between the Five Lamps and Newcomen Bridge on the Royal Canal was a tight-knit community, self-contained, with all its spiritual and physical needs satisfied within walking distance. The local shops, pubs and post office were the social meeting places where people would congregate to chat, exchange good news and bad. Village life was lively and intimate. Local pubs such as Fagan's, Crow's, Cretan's, Maguire's and Humphreys were not only focal points of social and cultural exchange, but also could be counted upon to provide financial help with meeting events like christenings, first communions, weddings and funerals. It was a little village unto itself where everybody knew each other and were always helping each other.
Oh, we seen the plane come straight over. We were looking at the pilot, with our mouth wide open.
On Friday the 30th of May, the people of the North Strand and Ballybock were looking forward to the promise of the Whit weekend. It had been a long, bleak winter of wartime rationing and blackouts. Everybody had plans of some sort. A visit to the seaside, a cycling tour, a picnic in the Phoenix Park. The city's dance halls and cinemas were expected to be packed. An air of excitement filled the locality. City dwellers were accustomed to staying late at weekends, particularly at bank holiday weekends. Late into the night, many people in the area were standing around, some on Newcomen Bridge, puffing their woodbines, quietly looking down into the moonlit waters of the canal. A glance over at the big clock outside Corkery's shop told them that midnight was approaching. Local people relied on the village clock to regulate their lives, but within a couple of hours the Corcoran's clock would be stilled and the North Strand changed forever. At midnight that Whit weekend, many people in the North Strand were still awake. At 12 the familiar drone of German bombers was heard overhead. This would not have alarmed those below, as for months squadrons of Luftwaffe planes had been flying over the city at night on their northerly route towards targets in London, Manchester and elsewhere. As there was no blackout operating in Dublin, people felt that the neutral city would be recognised by the pilots as they flew over. But this night they sounded louder, perhaps because the air was so clear, or was it because some of the planes were flying lower? Anti-aircraft searchlights were switched on, then warning flares were shot up to alert the pilots that they were indeed flying over neutral territory and should depart immediately. Normally they did, but not this night. They lingered and circulated in the clear evening sky after several anti-aircraft gunners at several batteries fired what should have been a final warning to the errant pilots. After an hour or so of watching this weekend spectacle of light, fireworks and sound, many people wondered why the planes were sticking around so long, especially as volleys of shell were now being fired. People who'd been watching the aerial event around the street and the canal and the North Strand went to bed, looking forward to the pleasant activities they had planned for themselves and their loved ones in the coming weekend. Some would never see the light of day. At 1:28, a bomb whistled earthward, then exploded. It fell near the junction of the North Circular Road and North Richmond Street near O'Connell School. It destroyed Mrs. Greish's shop at 582 North Circular Road and severely damaged water, gas and electricity lines. 1 minute later, a second bomb detonated just around the corner on Summerhill Parade. It destroyed two houses, numbers 43 and 44, and caused extensive damage to surrounding houses, particularly along Richmond Cottages. 3 women were trapped under the rubble and one later died due to the seriousness of her injuries. At 1:31, a third explosion was heard. What is believed to have been the same plane crossed Dublin as far as Ars and Uachtaráin, dropped a bomb beside the dog pound. It caused damage to the American legation and the Ors. In the zoo there was panic amongst the animals trying to escape. 2 did. A large bison and Sarah, a gentle elephant. 3 bomb blasts within 4 minutes. Some of the planes drifted off, but others remained, one conspicuously so. For half an hour the pilot engaged in daring aerobatics over the city, swooping low, then veering sharply, then darting off to a safer altitude. By 2 p.m. the Air Defence Command was convinced that the pilot was searching for something and perhaps awaiting instructions. He focused his low runs around the area of Buckingham Street, where there was a fire station, and Amiens Street Station, both of which had featured in the recent infringements of Ireland's neutrality by assisting Belfast in its hour of need and accepting refugees with open arms. Was this menacing behaviour a coincidence, or a search for revenge.
We were faced by a hellish scene. Nothing left. Devastation. Poor unfortunate people blown to blazes. It was as if we were in a different world.
At 2:05, the clock outside Corcoran shop in the North Strand was stilled forever. A thunderous, deafening explosion struck with terrifying suddenness. The sky turned a fiery crimson, and the earth shook violently from the ferocious force. Houses blew wildly apart, some just disintegrated. Steel lampposts and tram tracks melted like licorice sticks. Windows shattered by the thousand as bricks and slates were fired like mortar shells over great distances. In a split second, masses of people were killed, injured, or savagely mutilated. People who were out in the street and in wrecked houses were tossed like rag dolls. Some bodies were catapulted onto rooftops. Shell-shocked victims floated eerily about in their night attire. Survivors were terrified, hysterical. Everywhere around the North Strand there was panic and pandemonium. Some thought that doomsday had come, and for many, including entire families, it truly had arrived.
I had never seen so many dead cats and not a mark on them. The blast! Like they were sleeping in the sun.
The plane that had hovered so menacingly over the city, seemingly searching for a target, had dropped a 500-pound incendiary bomb between the tram tracks on the North Strand, almost completely wiping out the entire area between the Five Lamps and Newcomen Bridge. The bomb was created specifically to bomb targets made of concrete and steel. It was designed to detonate on impact with the surface for maximum destruction. The bomb carried out its purpose with perfection. In attempting to describe their experience, survivors could only compare it to nature's wrath, saying that it had been like a colossal earthquake, hurricane, or tornado, smashing their world to smithereens within seconds.
There was a blinding flash and a deafening smash, followed by silence.
Harry Brown was originally from Edenderry, County Offaly. He came from a family of coach builders. Harry was offered a job in the bus department of the Great Southern Railways, so he and his wife Molly and their children Maureen, Ann and Edward moved into 24 North Strand above Nally's shop. They moved there because of its resemblance to their rural roots. When the war started, Harry joined the local defence force and was meticulous in his service. Harry's father and mother had also moved to Dublin, and when his father was knocked down and killed on Newcomen Bridge, Harry's mother moved in with him over at Nally's shop. When the first bombs dropped around the Summerhill Parade and North Circular Road area, Harry immediately put on his helmet and armband and had gone to assist with rescue efforts. Meanwhile, looking at the clear sky, Angie Daly with her friends was still talking about the first two bombs. They had watched the rogue plane do its acrobats. But in the sky's silence, had Harry Brown thought his ordeal over?
We could see everything. We saw the plane coming straight over. We saw it as if we were sitting in it. We were looking at the pilot with our mouths open and we said, "Oh, Jesus, Mary and Joseph, he's back!"
Get down, your stomachs, get down. He's releasing.
It was whistling, and my granny knew it was going to fall. She thought we were goners, so she put her hands over my ears and pressed really hard so I wouldn't hear the bomb falling.
Harry Brown was headed for his home after a half an hour on rescue duty. He had a premonition when the mystery plane began zigzagging across the sky. He must have been only a few houses away from 24 North Strand when he heard the screaming bomb descending. His hand firmly grasped the doorknob of his house at the split second of the thunderous flash of the explosion, and there it was to remain frozen in his death. In that instant, the 7 members of the Brown family all perished in their home over Nally's shop. Someone once said that the death of thousands is just statistics, while the death of one is a tragedy with a story waiting to unfold. It was established that 28 people died directly because of the bombing. 3 families accounted for 13 of the deaths. That is nearly half of the fatal casualties. 7 members of the Brown family who lived at 24 North Strand above a grocery shop died instantly. The Fitzpatrick lost 4 members at 28 North Strand, where they lived above their butcher shop, and the McLaughlins, who were temporarily at 157 North Strand, lost 2 members. At number 157 was a tenement set in flats. 3 other tenants also perished.
Come on, Agnes, get up quick. We're being bombed.
When the second bomb fell on Summerhill Parade, the impact destroyed Catherine Slatter's shop at 44 Summerhill Parade and our neighbours Jane Fitzgerald House at number 43. But many other houses were rendered temporarily uninhabitable. Just on the other side of the crater, left behind by the bomb at 41 Summerhill, lived Patrick McLaughlin, his wife, 2-year-old William, and 2-month-old Vera. Their house suffered considerable damage and had to be vacated, but they considered themselves fortunate because his mother-in-law lived a few streets away in 157 North Strand. They grabbed a few items from the house and safely made their way to the Strand. As his wife was settling the children into their grannies, Patrick decided that he should go back to their damaged house to fetch more items and clothes. He realised that the area would be cordoned off the next day, so he thought he'd better go back now. After he collected a few items from the house on Summerhill Parade, he started to walk back to the Strand, probably thinking of how different their weekend would be now, but thankful that his family were unhurt and safely ensconced in the warmth and love of their grannies. Like Harry Brown, he too was perturbed when he saw the mystery plane swoop low. He must have panicked and dropped the collected items and ran fast, his heart beating as he heard the whistle and shriek of the dropping bomb. He reached the door seconds before the impact and probably only had enough time to shout a warning to his families. When rescuers arrived within minutes with blistering hands and aching backs, they painstakingly found his wife and baby Vera. But Patrick and his 2-year-old son William were found dead under tons of suffocating rubble. One newspaper described his fate.
He must just have arrived back at the North Strand house when death came hurtling from a starlit sky.
As pointed out, the area between the Five Lamps and Newcomen Bridge was a village capable of satisfying all human needs within walking distance. On the left-hand side, as Newcomen Bridge is approached, there were a cluster of shops in which some people lived above. This is where Charvel Mall flats are now.
Number 23 and 24 North Strand, M. Fagan Family Grocer.
25 North Strand, M. Dempsey Draper.
26 J. Jordan, Butcher.
27 R. Fitzpatrick, Vittler.
28 P. Fitzpatrick, jeweller.
29 W. Granville, General Stores.
30 North Strand, Mission Hall.
31 W. Lynch Grocer.
32 J. A. Paddison, Chemist.
33 T. Roach Hairdresser.
34 North Strand, M.J. Ruddy Confectioners.
35 North Strand Post Office.
On the opposite side where Larkin House is now, house numbers 153 to 164 were destroyed. Over 20 houses were instantly destroyed. A further 45 were so irreparably damaged they had to be levelled in the days that follows. Another 300 were severely damaged and over 1,000 houses suffered roof damage. Ironically, 164 contained another small business, J.M. McCarthy, undertaker. So this was the place where your needs could be met from the cradle to the grave. All these businesses, shops, premises with community services were destroyed. The village vanished in an instant flash.
I still think there were people buried on that site. They were never reported missing and never found. Down underneath it all.
The official figure of fatalities is 28, but there are many people who contest that number. Alec King, who was Chief Rescue and Demolition Officer on the night of the bombing, did detailed research on the subject. He would eventually place his final total at 45 deaths. These would include estimated unreported people missing, people who died later because of injuries sustained on the night, and including 3 people killed on the south side of the city when, as a result of vibrations from the explosion, a tenement in Old Bride Street collapsed. The true figure may never be known. Alex King and his rescue team had arrived at the North Strand only minutes after the bomb exploded. After 60 hours of painstaking recovery work, sometimes working with bare hands so as to avoid further collapse of the fragile buildings, he returned home physically and emotionally spent. He stripped to have a bath.
As I took off my socks and wellies, I was down to my vest and underpants. I had looked at myself. I was covered in blood. I looked at my hands. They were nothing but red, pussy sore things. I was cut and bruised all over. I thought, this is a minor thing compared to what we saw over that 60 hours. I took off my underpants and discovered the ring of my stomach was raw flesh. I'd been eaten alive by all kinds of bugs. They'd come up my feet because of the elastic around my trousers couldn't get any further. So they decided to eat underneath. I got a big bottle of Jay's fluid and lashed the whole thing into the bath. The pain around my stomach was excruciating from the raw flesh and the Jay's fluid.
One morning in 1943, almost 2 years later, he couldn't remember the month, he received an envelope with a slight bulge. It turned out to be a medal with a letter from the Department of Defence. The letter was addressed to him personally, but was written on a standard printed form. They had abstract words expressing gratitude for service rendered on the 31st of May 1941. He held the medal in his still scarred hands, the one that had held a woman's severed head and had removed amputated limbs from rubble amid devastation, cries for help and death for a solid 60 hours. Neither the letter nor the medal had much meaning for him. He felt neglected. Even 53 years later, he would confide.
So anonymous. Just sent out by post. No ceremony. Why didn't they gather the 80 men and the other dedicated rescue workers and with a handshake and a simple thank you and give the medal some meaning? All too anonymous and bureaucratic. Too impersonal. Hurtful, really.
But for many people, the untold story of that fateful Whit weekend lies in the question. Did the government's response to the North Strand bombing cause more damage to the community in the long run than the actual bombing itself? Did the government in its response not only neglect the rescuers, but also the needs of the survivors themselves? Some commentators have stated that for the government and the public administrators, the bombing was a political and defence issue to be dealt with in abstract diplomatic terms, rather than the destruction of a once viable living community. The scattering of the community began fast. By the next morning after the bombing, shelters for the homeless began to open up. Refugees came not only from the North Strand, but also from the surrounding areas, their homes too damaged for safe habitation. The Red Cross headquarters in Mespel Road accommodated the largest number, but other shelters were used, like the convent in William Street, Charleville Library, Onoga Hall in Mountjoy Square, even the Mansion House and the Municipal Art Gallery in Parnell Square, and the Royal Theatre was deployed as shelters for the dispossessed. The dispersal of families often led to confusion, as many people initially listed as missing or feared dead were eventually found in shelters. Slowly, people would grow desperate to get a permanent home, and for hundreds of homeless people desperate to escape the uncomfortable shelters, places like Cabra and Crumlin were imagined as the promised land. But others saw Cabra as the wild and woolly West, and were dead set against going out to the bog, as they called it.
Cabra at the time, to those living in the city centre, it felt like it was miles and miles out in the country. They felt like they were being banished to the bogs.
They had been perfectly content where they were, but after the bomb destroyed their village, the corporation told the North Stranders that Cabra was to be their future, like it or not. Remarkably, by June the 25th, the new settlers began their westward journey filled with both fear and excitement. They were brought out to Cabra in corporation lorries, bringing with them the few parcels of clothing and other small personal items they had salvaged from their bombed houses. But their worst fears were confirmed.
Oh, it was absolutely primitive. We were being drawn into the unknown. There were no other houses around.
nor were there any civilised features such as footpaths, railings, gates, postbox or exterior house adornments, just boxy houses set out on brown, barren open space.
It was a nightmare. We had nothing out there. A field it was. We'd no footpaths, no railings, a wood plank to come into the house. Really and truly lost. We were out in the wilds.
When they entered their new homes, they immediately noticed that some work was unfinished and not up to standard. Carpentry and painting were shoddy. Doors and window frames were not properly fit.
The houses just weren't ready. They should have taken another 6 months. They had to rush, and the result is poor craftsmanship and shoddy work.
The final straw in the camel's back was the lack of furniture and equipment and bedding for ordinary decent survival.
We didn't have any money to buy stuff. When I look back on it, I think, my God, we were very poor. With the upheaval of the bomb and then the losses, how my mother survived it all, I do not know.
The Cabra settlers had assumed that the corporation would help them to make the empty dwellings livable by providing at least some money and furnishings. They were wrong. The corporation saw its responsibility at putting a roof over the refugees' heads, and then they had to fend for themselves. Essentially, people had to camp out in their empty dwellings. Homesickness would become a serious issue, leading sometimes to depression. They were put out in Cabra, and it was never the same.
They left their hearts back in the city, and they all wanted to go back always.
While some never adjusted, and many hearts were broken by nostalgia, most Cabra settlers stuck it out in the Wild West, as they called it, more by necessity than choice. By surviving, they showed their resilience and fortitude in the face of adversity. For example, the settlers had received army blankets when they moved in. What they were given was grey, thick and warm, but scratchy. Eventually, they were given more colourful, softer ones from the Red Cross and other charitable organisations. As the winter set in, some of them decided to go to a local tailor and have the blankets turned into coats. Not stylish, but warm and durable. It became the rage within days, and the grey coats became like a badge of pride in their survival. When they went back into the city, their grey blanket coats would identify them as bomb refugees. Many wore the distinctive grey coats for years, some even for decades, so as not to forget the ordeal they had endured. Gradually, their quality of life improved. Furniture was acquired, paths, railings and gardens added, shops, pubs and a cinema sprang up. A church and places to socialise and play developed, and slowly the settlers became natives and became a community again, despite government neglect. In a way, the site of the bombing was given the same neglectful treatment as the brave and dedicated rescuers and the settlers who had to fend for themselves in what they considered to be wastelands. To local people, the barren and scarred ground was a constant reminder of official neglect.
Just a few years after the Blitz, England was all built up again, and we couldn't believe it, because the North Strand was still in rubble. Still a bomb site.
Not long after the bombing, there were plans for a block of flats on the perimeter and amenities, including a swimming pool in the centre, but this never got the go-ahead. In many ways, the site became a casualty of the debate about whether the future of housing for the working class lay in the suburbs or in medium-sized flats in the inner city. It was the famous trade unionist Jim Larkin who, as a city councillor, argued for accommodation for the working class to be built on the site. Yet, a full generation after the tragedy, a large swath of the North Strand stood blatantly derelict. As the years went by, the site was examined under a number of different emerging urban planning perspectives and needs. Road and transport consideration, housing needs and architectural traditions as to whether the replacement of what was once a village should pay respect to the surrounding Georgian and Victorian buildings. There was also the need to respond to the increasing derelict and insanitary crumbling tenements spread across the north inner city. The bomb's impact and vibrations had destabilised hundreds of these slums across the city, putting at risk hundreds of people, thus accelerating the need for a slum clearance policy. Eventually, in the mid-50s, a block of flats would be built on the eastern side of the site, named after Jim Larkin, who died in 1947. They were below the road level and had a stairwell built internally. An interesting feature of the block is that each staircase serves only 2 flats on each floor. The 36 flats are spacious, with some amenities for children in the forecourt. It would be the late 60s before the site on the western side would be constructed. This is the side where the library is, which played such a part in the rescuing, organising and sheltering survivors on the night. These would consist of masonette-type blocks of dwellings. Effectively, they were small houses on top of each other. Some would say flats on top of each other with an upstairs bedroom. They were built over bedsit-type old folks. They would have a round tower-style stairway external to the blocks themselves, leading to a common balcony. Charleville Mall was 1 block, North William Street 2 blocks and North Clarence Street 3 blocks. Each block has 16 masonettes over 8 old folks' flats, making 96 family dwellings and 48 old folks' homes. This amount of houses would make up a small town, but the area is now essentially a drive-through with its village appearance and atmosphere gone forever. Soon they would be occupied by people beyond the area, who some would say had no interest in the North Strand's rich traditions and historical past.
We welcomed them in, but they weren't belonging to the area. They weren't part of the old stock. It wasn't the same.
The transplanted Cabra residents who had long pined to return home declined to transfer back. They felt they would never fit in with the new North Strand. They didn't want to live in flats. They looked back with nostalgia for a community now scattered to the 4 winds, to the wilderness of the emerging suburbs. An untold story? One fact is certain. Their lives changed in an instant at 2:05 on the 31st of May 1941, when a village vanished 80 years ago.